Welcome, everybody. This is episode 21. We, the Parents Podcast. I'm very excited to have my guest, family law attorney, the father's rights attorney, Mr. Mark Reel Jr. Mark, how are you today?
What's going on? I'm good. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. I want to go ahead and give a shout out to our sponsor. This is our first sponsor ever. This episode is brought to you by Child Support. Creating fatherlessness since Title 4D of the Social Security Act. So we want to thank Child Support for helping this episode get started. So without further ado, Mark, I like to allow my guests to introduce themselves because I can rattle off all the fun facts that you gave me, but I'd rather you tell your story. Mark, tell us about you.
What's going on? So I am, as you said, Chris, I am a family law attorney. My firm, Real Father's Rights, is based in Southern California. We practice really throughout the state of California. I also am the host of my own show, State of the Family Courts, which airs on the Father's Rights Movement social channels every Thursday night. So we'll be live on there tomorrow. A little bit about me. I spent about a decade as a sports and fitness industry professional. Worked in Major League Baseball, worked for major fitness brands, and back in 2017 found myself in family law court. I'm the father of soon-to-be 4-year-old twins, a little boy and a little girl. Oh. And in going through that process, I was like, there has to be a better way to help men and to advocate for men through this process that can really be the most challenging time of our lives. So took me a couple years, finally kind of figured out what that would look like. And in 2021, we opened up Real Father's Rights, which is a firm that's dedicated exclusively to helping fathers in California navigate the family law court system.
Wow. So you said you did all these things in your career. When did you become a family law attorney?
Yeah, so we're talking about 2021. So I went back and got and formally got licensed in 2020, actually during the pandemic. And then in 2021 is when I officially formally opened the firm up to the general public. Okay.
So tell me, because this has always been trivial for me, and you know, I've included you in a attorneys chat for this podcast because I want to have you and other attorneys throughout the country who are active in this movement, who have not only fought the family law system as, you know, with their clients who want change, but are many of them, including yourself, have your own case going on with your own children. You are a licensed attorney at law. You are we call you guys, what's the term? What of the court? You're
in all these groups, I get called all sorts of different names. But I know where you're going. A guardian of the court or something along those lines.
You're a respected human being in your industry. Obviously, you have a license to practice law. You litigate for families and children, and you yourself have been brought into this arena not as an attorney, but as a client, or you know, I'm assuming you're obviously representing yourself because you can only afford you, or why would you want to waste your money if you're an attorney? But how is this even possible? Shouldn't that be the first ding, ding, ding for people that there are attorneys who are actively practicing that are losing their children and fighting court battles?
Yeah, I mean, I talk to men every single day. And there should be a ding, ding, ding thing that goes off on there. There's issues. Well-respected law enforcement officers, retired military veterans, teachers, coaches, the full gamut of men come into my office. And if there was an issue, then wouldn't that issue have come up long before that? Or right. The one that always perplexes me is situations where the couple was married for 8, 10, 12, 14 years, and all of a sudden wife goes and files in court and says that that their co-parent is now an unfit father, despite the fact that they have 2, 3, 4 kids.
She just kept making babies.
Been a father for a decade.
Yeah, yeah. And it wasn't until the unfortunately, marriages and relationships do fall apart, but it should be very clear. I don't have a legal degree and I don't have a psychology degree, but I do listen to attorneys like yourself, and I do listen to clinical psychologists and therapists. And the ding, 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 the common sense thing that these judges and attorneys should be understanding is guys, it just doesn't make sense. Like I get legal procedure and facts and this, but at the end of the day, just like you mentioned, where is all this coming from now? You know, he was good enough until the relationship dissolved, and that should be the first question that we ask.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, and I want to turn it back to the legal profession. And I mentioned in the intro that I'd worked in the sports industry, the fitness industry. I spent really the first decade of my professional career in those 2 arenas. And I'll tell you this, the most competitive subset of human beings I have ever been around aren't the professional athletes. They aren't the high-level fitness competitors. It's attorneys.
Right.
What you see in movies about how cutthroat law school can be, in a sense, that is the case. And we have a legal system currently outside of essentially 2 states at this point where it pits the parties against each other. And so you throw attorneys in there, the most competitive human beings on the planet that most likely have never experienced this type of trauma, this sort of experience in their life. And all of a sudden it's all out war. Right. Because this best interest of the child standard that we use, it's trash the other parent because that's how you're going to win. Mm-hmm. So it's just this perfect storm of you put extremely competitive humans who have been told to win at all costs. Mm-hmm. And then you throw this, I call it an excuse, not a legal standard, the best interest of the child, in there. And it just creates this perfect storm of bias and then the ability to cover up that potential bias to, that the courts have. So it's the entire system needs to be scrapped. It's not any one person. It's not any one group. It's this perfect storm of just a complete and total just mess of how we do things.
Well, it's a money grab. It may have been designed to help, but when you put human beings who are flawed and sometimes evil and sometimes sick in this arena where you give them this oligopoly power, especially with judges, you know, whether we're talking about family law or criminal law, judges and attorneys, the immunity. I'm sorry, I know you're an attorney, and I think you would agree with me. We need to get rid of qualified and absolute immunity in this country. There is no officer of a court or judge or police officer or public servant that should not be held accountable the same as its citizens. And that has created this cottage industry where everyone's protecting themselves. The good news is with the internet, just as bad information can be used to feed zombies, you can also use it to feed the awake. And, you know, with this movement, with people like you, fathers like you, attorneys like you, advocates like myself, who, you know, I may have to run for office and be an attorney one day. I don't know. I'm not there yet. I might write another song. We'll see how it goes. You know, I started a podcast, never wanted to do a podcast. There was no subject on earth that, you know, that I ever talked about that I went, you know what, I really need to talk about that, until I learned about family law, went through my own thing, then looked at the overall. I mean, this is a public health crisis. It should be the number one public health crisis. It's killing more people than COVID-19. That's a fact. That's not, I'm not posturing at all. You know, between suicides, medications, overdoses, mass shootings, everything that we know that is caused by, you know, we do like to preface that this does happen to women, but ladies, you must give it to us that 85% in this country of custodial parents are mothers. So it's drastically lopsided. This is a child's rights issue. It's a parent's rights issue, but it is egregiously affecting fathers. And the removal of men has been, I think, our government's best way to stay in power and remain stronger.
I mean, I think you covered a pretty wide range of issues there. The first thing I think is something that is complex, the immunity issue. So on one side of it, I wholly agree. We've seen this rash of instances where therapists and guardian ad litem attorneys have been granted the quasi-judicial immunity. I am 100% in favor of that. Needs to go. If you're found to have been a bad actor, then you need to be punished as the courts see fit, or for whatever laws you have violated. You need to be open to the party you harmed being able to sue you in civil court for financial. I 100% agree with that. Yeah. It's a little bit more complicated with judges. It would have to be very, very nuanced, because what we don't want is we do not want to get rid. We may need to get rid of blanket judicial immunity and kind of lessen the strings on if there are bad actors, if there is malice in what they've done. But if you were to lift immunity from judges, courts wouldn't happen. It would just be judges fighting off lawsuits. Right. What we would need to do is create some sort of accountability. And you've seen this in several states, the facts, findings, and conclusions. Where if a judge goes away from whatever the standard is, whether it's in Kentucky and Arkansas where it's 50-50, or in West Virginia, if a judge orders less than 35% custody to a parent, they have to write out a facts, findings, and conclusions of law. And what that requires them to do is to lay out their reasoning. And that can have two impacts. There's the accountability piece, because you can't just say, well, I didn't know what to do, so I gave them to mom. You have to lay out and reason within the laws of that and confines of that state. And we don't have a state in this country that allows for the judge to consider the sex of the parent. Right. So if a judge has to logically lay out and reason why they made the decisions they made, and it's not just, I didn't know what to do, I didn't know what to believe, so I gave them to mom, that's going to create a level of accountability from the bench. There's obviously then a piece that I firmly believe there's an extremely strong bias that occurs. And the legal term that gets used is implicit bias. And where we hear most about implicit bias is in criminal courts. Studies have been done for years that the darker your skin, the longer your prison sentence for similarly situated individuals. Like if you have an African-American male with extremely dark skin, he's going to get a longer prison sentence than, say, a Hispanic man with brown skin. And the white man is going to get the shortest sentence. Where we stop and where the studies show is there's actually a bigger gap, female to male, even in the criminal justice system. So we have studies that show that in a court of law, women are treated more favorably, considerably more favorably, especially in the criminal spectrum. And you mentioned the 85. I think the last census, I think it was 78% of contested custody cases. Primary custody went to the mom. Okay. So it's anywhere in between there. So we have the statistics that back up that women are treated more favorably in the courts. But the general public at large, and this ties into the next point you made, the general public at large is not aware of these issues. So, hey, I had graduated from law school. I'd been a working professional for 7-8 years. And when my kids were born and things went sideways, I just assumed I would be able to walk into court and it's like, I'm an upstanding individual with the only thing on my record is one traffic ticket when I was 18 years old. Like there's nothing on my record. I have almost 2 decades at this point of working with kids. Right. They're gonna split it up. We're gonna go our separate ways. It's gonna be a quick and easy process. Right. And I was rudely awakened with what then transpired. That this is not fair. There are dirty tricks. There are dirty tactics. There are just different levers that can be pulled to keep fathers out of their children's lives for not just weeks, not just months, but legitimately years.
Years until they age
and
out.
Then
sometimes.
you go to the social media part. You talked about social media has been the biggest gift to this movement. So in studying the history of the way kind of the equal and shared parenting movement is what I like to call, what I like to refer to it as. It was very much a fringe movement. It was something where you kind of had to be one of the loonies out there shouting outside the courthouse to get any sort of attention. And you look now, and I know you're in these groups, you interact in these groups, you have a platform yourself. I mean, there are dozens of groups with hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, whether it be the Father's Rights Movement or Dad Talk Today or We the Parents podcast or National Parents Organization. And then you add in those groups that are not necessarily organizations, but just about discussing fathers' rights. It's brought fathers together. It's something that us as men, we wouldn't talk about normally. And Facebook has created these communities where men feel comfortable to share their stories, talk about their experiences. For example, I mean, it's kind of an ironic reuniting. I reunited with a friend of mine from high school where some people started posting about me in one of the groups. And he was a father who had been through a similar situation, and we reconnected. But if it wasn't for these platforms, we would never congregate anywhere and have these discussions. So it's become an extremely powerful driver that has driven this movement to the mainstream. Now, I know people get super frustrated about what's going on legislatively and the bullshit that happened in West Virginia and Texas and Tennessee. But we had 5 states in 2021 coming off of a pandemic that passed better laws in terms of equal and shared parenting. And that number is only going to grow. It's going to be a slow movement because of the forces that we're fighting against. But this movement's moved into the mainstream. It's a topic of discussion in most state houses across this country. And it may take 5 years. It may take 10 years. It may take 15 years. But the legislative piece of it is moving rapidly in terms of civil rights and how fast those issues typically move. And I usually use the example of like we ended slavery in the 1860s. The Civil Rights Act of 1965. So it took us 100 years to actually pass any laws that gave Facebook color. It took 100 years. You move to more recent times, things that have moved faster. In the 2000s, there were states where it was illegal in your own home to have homosexual relations. In the 2000s, we're talking about this millennium. And in 2015, we get a Supreme Court decision that essentially, not getting into technical legal things, essentially makes gay marriage legal in all 50 states. And I think a big part of that was social media. So, I don't think it's going to take 100 years because, I mean, when it was Malcolm X and Martin Luther King fighting for these rights, they had to write letters. They had to phone each other. Now we have this amazing platform that is social media. And I think primarily the movement's centered around Facebook because of the functionalities and the groups. But you have these platforms that can speed this process up. I tell people, I think the next 2 to 5 years, if we stop shouting into the echo chamber and we start having conversations with people outside of the movement, the next 2 to 5 years, this is going to be one of the biggest social justice issues in the country, period.
Tell us a little bit. Can you go into your personal story? I know you're an attorney, so you know what you can and can't say. What's going on with your personal case?
I typically don't dive too deep into it just because it still is ongoing. But essentially, I'm the father of soon to be 4-year-old twins, a little boy and a little girl. And at the hospital, she slipped out of the hospital while I was at work, left me off the birth certificate, contested paternity, domestic violence allegations, the whole 9. If it's a tool that can be used, it's been used against me, which probably gives me a little bit different perspective in representing clients because I've been in their shoes. I've been in that seat where it's like, I didn't know this was something that was possible.
So, what is your advice for fathers like me? You're obviously, you said you're still fighting it. Can we win this in a courtroom, or should we be putting our energy in bettering ourselves, working on our mental health, working on our finances, and working on our lives so that we're positioned better? And should we be advocating more in other areas and not just within our battle, within our courtrooms?
So I think I always tell people, I think it's kind of a three-pronged approach to creating change in family court. The first piece of it is you need to do everything you can to succeed under the rules that we have now. Mm-hmm. So they suck, they're biased, the numbers point to that. No matter what anyone wants to say, the raw data says that it's slanted to an extreme degree towards women winning in family court. And I don't usually like using the winning, losing, but for simplicity, we'll use that.
Right. Layman's terms.
Yeah. So we need to focus on more dads getting more custody to show that's a good thing. Right. One of the most powerful tools we have right now is it's the data that's coming out of the state of Kentucky, because Kentucky in 2017 passed a presumption of 50-50 on temp orders, and in 2018 passed it on final orders. So we're starting to get that data rolling out of what it does with domestic violence, what it does with education, what it does with the length of court battles. So we're starting to get these positive data points coming out and we need to get more of those across the country. More dads that have more time with their kids and there shows positive results are going to be better. Even a state like the state of Texas. The state of Texas this year didn't get the 50-50 presumption bill that they probably had the votes for, but it got stalled in committee. But they did get an extended, so their standard parenting order is now giving the non-custodial more time. Right. Well, if over the next couple of years, which I know everybody down in Texas is going to make a run at it again over the next couple of years, but as data starts to come out and it's positive towards kids' growth and development, that's something that can go to legislators. That's something that can go to fighting against these groups who fight so vehemently to keep 50-50 bills out of the chamber for votes. Number two is I honestly believe, and this is something that changed in my opinion, my personal opinion, over the last 6 to 9 months. I think that in the legal spectrum in terms of suing in regards to the constitutionality of state laws. So I think there are several custody laws that are unconstitutional. But it's going to take challenges to those laws. It's going to take appeals after their challenge in Superior Court or the district court, trial court, whatever your state says, and getting them to state Supreme Courts. Because I think when we without getting super technical, we're going to need to start challenging these laws, and that's going to put pressure on the legislators to create better laws. And ultimately, if these legislators don't create better laws, hopefully we get multiple Supreme Courts that rule differently. And potentially that could end up something that the U.S. Supreme Court has to weigh in on. So I think that lawsuits in not necessarily federal court, I think federal court could be a little bit of a challenge, but challenging state laws and their constitutionality within the states could be a huge positive, if to do nothing other than put pressure on the legislators to create better laws. So I think that's going to be a major piece. And then the third one's got to be the bias. There is bias. We're never going to get rid of discretion in family court. Just by the nature of what family court's deciding, we can't remove all discretion because there are serious situations. Domestic violence does occur. Child abuse does occur. These things happen. Substance abuse is a serious issue for some people. And so we have to allow some level of discretion on the bench. Now, there has to be accountability to that discretion, but there has to be some level of discretion. But I sit there and I have to do so much, what's called continuing learning and education, CLEs. And part of that is it's big, the diversity and inclusion and implicit bias training and things like that. Never once have I seen anything to do with how the sexes are treated different in court. So we need to start educating people on what they're really deciding, what they're really doing. We spend, literally law firms spend millions of dollars a year training their employees about racial bias, which occurs. But we don't spend any time talking about the bias that occurs, one, in the courts, two, in the from employers, the expectations around fathers versus the expectations around mothers. We don't have those conversations. That a lot of times mothers, the conversation around that is that mothers make less than fathers because employers kind of project certain things onto the mothers. Oh, they're going to have to stay at home. They're going to be less ambitious. On the opposite end of the spectrum, it's like dad's going to get pressured to go back to work immediately. Dad's going to get pressured to get back in that normal flow. When the kid needs something during the day, the employer a lot of times is going to be less likely to look at a father and say, okay, yeah, you need to go do that. Where a mother may get that benefit.
Right.
So we need to start bringing awareness to the bias in business, in the court, everything that we give to parents, because it harms mothers and fathers. And ultimately the one who catches the worst of it are the children.
Right.
Like there's studies that have come out recently that show that this 50-50 presumption is what's in the best interest for dad, mom, and the child. So I think it's the Women's Law Center in Washington, D.C., I think is the actual name of the organization. They released a study that said that white women made 71% of what fathers made. And Black mothers made 64%, and Hispanic mothers made 52% of what fathers made.
Okay.
And so you look at it, and then on top of that, women that share 50-50 custody are 54% more likely to be six-figure earners.
They earn more,
more likely. So you think about it, you look on that side of it, and wealth of the family is a huge indicator for childhood success. If you come from a wealthy family, you're less likely to experience teen pregnancy. You're more likely to graduate from college. Any number of those positive outcomes that we always talk about that are directly tied to fatherlessness. On the other side of things, men's mental health scores, when the difference between 25% custody and 50% custody, their mental health scores are just through the roof. That extra 25%, they're more present. Then we talk about child support. The child support system's broken. It's a nuanced discussion, but you look at it right now, when we put so much parental responsibility on mom and we inhibit her ability to earn, and then we don't have the safeguards to protect dad from going into poverty, all of a sudden we've created two low-income households for the child. How is that going to be in the best interest of any child? And then on top of that, the number one factor that a lot of studies cite in terms of equal and shared parenting, or as equal as possible, maximizing time with each parent, is that the number one thing a kid reacts to is knowing that they have both parents that love them and that they aren't going to go an extremely long period of time not seeing one of those parents.
That adds stress and anxiety.
Yeah, the anxiety of like, am I going to see dad? When am I going to see dad next? Oh, it's going to be another month before I get to see him in person. That's not going to be good for the child either.
I have a question. Do judges have the authority to mandate or request any psychiatric or psychological evaluations without an expert's opinion?
That's going to be very state specific. So state family codes would cover what the judge has discretion to do. Most states are going to have some sort of levers that can be pulled. It's just a matter of when can they be pulled? Does there have to be an actual reason? Do they have to have, is there some sort of standard for them to be able to order it? Or can they just order it when they feel like it? But most states are going to have some sort of evaluation written into their family codes or their codes of civil procedure that are going to allow the judge, if they have questions about something, to order an evaluation.
Yeah. So, we talk about just looking at the simple ding, ding, dings. Let's talk about some of those ding, ding, dings. You're an attorney. You said we talked about other well-established careers, police officers, teachers. The weird thing is we talk about everyone's allowed to be a stepdad, but I can't raise my own kids. I can open up a daycare right now. If I wanted to run a daycare as a business owner, as a man, I can open up a daycare and watch everyone's children. But until that judge with that discretion allows me to have my own kids, yes, I could be a teacher and raise your children probably more than a parent would, spend 8 hours a day with them and educate them, shape their minds and their attitudes and their outlook on life. I can do those things. So when we talk about these simplistic logical statements, these scenarios, you could raise my kids, I could raise yours, but a judge separates us. We talk about discretion. You said discretion's never going to go away. Should the courts be removed from this process? You also mentioned that. So it's a two-parter question. Should the courts be removed from this process? And what is the alternative? We have real issues that are more about emotions and psychological issues rather than domestic violence. You said there are real things like domestic violence. Shouldn't those things be done in criminal court with a jury instead of giving it to a entity called family court, where discretion and your basis of legality is preponderance? If there is such things where men or women are unfit, well, they must have done something severe enough that we can't just speculate at, because that's abusive. We can't say the child's best interest and play it safe, because a lot of times, most of the time, most allegations, I don't know if you know the statistic, it's roughly around 70% of allegations are false, in our court system. So we are abusing people under the guideline of protecting them. And I think that's really been this country's MO for everything. It's like, well, I don't want any responsibility, so let's just take his or her kids. So you know what I mean? And then if something
That's a fantastic point. So I want to touch on that. I want to touch on that exactly. So you think about it this way. So you have that preponderance of the evidence standard in terms of a lot of states with their domestic violence. Mm-hmm. I'm here in the state of California, where a finding at the preponderance of evidence of domestic violence creates a presumption that 5 years you should not have joint or sole legal or physical custody.
Wow.
So we've created a law that incentivizes women and men. It happens both ways, but I would say primarily, I represent only men. I would say I can say right now I don't have a single case where I'm pursuing a domestic violence restraining order, but I would say probably 75% of my clients, either in the past or currently, are having one pursued against them. Mm. So that piece, it's really challenging in terms of, can you take that and put it in criminal court? That may create more problems than solutions. So if we were working in Mark's fantasy land of how we handle child custody in America in 2021 and beyond.
That sounds like a nice place.
Yeah, for some people. So it needs to be less combative at the beginning. So that starting point, like we have in Arkansas now, it's presumption of 50-50, and the presumption must be overcome by clear and convincing evidence. So much higher standard, not the criminal beyond reasonable doubt, but clear and convincing evidence. So I think that implementing a standard like that could help. But we need to make things less combative. We need to get rid of this best interest of the child. All the science points to a child having both parents as being what's best.
Right.
And so if we go in and there's an extremely strong presumption that it is 50-50 custody, that's number one. It's going to incentivize parties to agree. If the attorneys go in knowing exactly what it's going to take or what the result's going to be if there's no agreement, that's going to incentivize the parents to come to an agreement. That's not going to be enough, though, because I still have to educate clients on a daily basis that, hey, you're going to hear from her mom, her auntie, her cousin, her friend, that you can't take the kids away from mom. You can't do this. You can't do that because mom knows best.
Right.
We need to create a more robust collaborative process. You see, there are several attorneys who have kind of come to prominence within the movement because they're big and all they do is the collaborative divorce process, where essentially if the parents can't come to an agreement, they've bankrupted themselves both before they even get to court.
So,
So we need to create a process that is much more collaborative from the get-go, that incentivizes the parties coming to a resolution without the judge making decisions.
Right.
Like right now in California, every single time you request an order in the state of California, you have to go to mediation. But in typical state government fashion, there's not enough resources to actually truly have a legitimate mediation session.
Right.
It happens. It can be the mediator talks to each parent for 15 minutes. It can be that they talk to them together for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and they're like, hey, we can't come to an agreement. Let's move on, because there's not the resources. There needs to be a robust mediation system that prevents cases from even getting in front of a judge. There's some technology, some artificial intelligence stuff that's kind of coming down the pipeline that's probably still 5, 7, 10 years away because the legal world moves extremely slow, that can help put cases in buckets to allow maybe less human discretion and the cases to get the right attention they need. Right. And this would be a win-win for everyone. If you're having more cases settle before they get in front of a judge, those serious cases that do involve substance or domestic violence or child abuse are going to be able to get more attention. It's not going to be the judge showing up Monday through Thursday and having a morning call of 25 to 30 cases and then having a trial every afternoon. It's going to be the ones that get in front of the judge are the ones where there are serious issues, or there are legitimate things that just cannot be, like, say, a move away or something like that. So it's going to allow those cases to have more time. It's not going to be that 15 minutes in front of a judge and the judge makes a snap decision. Right. It's going to allow those cases that need more time to get more time. And it's going to allow those cases where the parties actually agree on most things to come to a resolution. Because the crazy thing I see is that in reality, most parties agree on 80 to 90% of the issues at stake in their case. Right. And it's those one or two issues that cause the cases to drag on for years. It's not the full case that's at issue. Yeah. And so if we're able to kind of put those cases into buckets, give people the resources and not charge them for the resources. Right. Right now, in a lot of states, it's a money game. Right. Oh, you got to pay $7,000 for this evaluation. You're going to have to pay $500 an hour for that mediator. If you can remove the financial incentive from it and just provide those resources, then that could go a long way into cleaning up the way family court operates.
Instead of having child support Title IV funding social services, why don't we reallocate some of that money into services that actually help families and children instead of divide them?
Yeah. So why not, instead of having if you're in a state that has mandatory mediation, why not allow that if both parties check a box, they get X number of hours with a professional mediator? To fully flesh out their case. And and make it more well known about the collaborative divorce laws. Many states now are passing these collaborative divorce laws, which create very good incentives for the parties to come to an agreement without the judge making a decision. Because the worst thing that any parent should want is a judge making any decision for their child, for their family. At the end of the day, the two parents should be the ones who come together and come to some resolution that's going to be best for them and ultimately most importantly, their child. Right.
Let's talk about, you mentioned a couple subjects. Let's talk about mediation. The current state of mediation, I can only speak for myself in the state of North Carolina, is absolutely useless. It's a prerequisite to going to court. They say, all right, well, you guys got to talk it out first. But if you have a high conflict parent, you only need one that says, I'm not doing this, I don't agree. You're in there for minutes, if not seconds. And the mediator really can't really dig deep and force you. Not that you should be forced to mediate, but the mediation process needs to be a little bit more hang tough and have more resources within it, whether it be counseling, co-parenting classes, some sort of therapy within that mediation, because you can't just ask these two people that if one's combative or they're both combative, they're going to go in there just as hot-headed without someone actually mediating. So what I experienced is a very pleasant woman saying to me and her, what do you guys want to do? And we haven't agreed yet, obviously. And so we're just like, well, we don't agree. All right, well, can't do anything here. What is the point of her getting paid?
Well, that's exactly. It's a lack of resources, because essentially that individual has who knows how many cases they see in a day. They probably have a full 8 hours worth of appointments every single day. And it probably varies state to state, but what incentive do they really have to settle the cases? If you know you only let's just look at the practical human side of it, because at the end of the day, judges, attorneys, mediators, counselors, we're human. Right. If I walk in there with my co-parent and there's clearly no way in the next 60 minutes that we're going to agree on anything,
right?
That person has two choices. They can hang in there for 60 minutes, or they can say, all right, no, you guys aren't going to come to a deal. Bye. I'm going to hang out in my office for the next 50 minutes before my next appointment.
Right.
I mean, that's a practical human, that isn't even the logistics of it or the funding of it or the resources allocated to it. That's a practical human experience. So we need to create something that incentivizes. I think education, you mentioned education.
Yeah.
Education would be a huge piece. We need the general public and anybody entering into the family court phase, because I don't think I've ever met anyone that is knowledgeable on what goes on in family court that hasn't either been in family court or had a very close family member or friend end up in family court. Like, it's something you only experience when things have gone wrong for you or someone very close to you in your life.
Right.
So how can we educate parties about what should happen, what could happen, how to best deal with the situation? If you and your co-parent just flat out don't agree,
right?
How can we educate those people to get some sort of agreement that's going to take things out of the judge's hands? How can we do that? And I don't know the answer to that question. There's always going to be cases. I think the biggest fallacy in a lot of the fathers' rights movement is attorneys are evil, attorneys are this, attorneys are just running up bills. But in reality, like, I can make a super reasonable offer to opposing counsel and they can say, let me take that back to my client, but I think that's a good idea. And I take the idea back to my client, they take it to theirs, both of them say hell no, and we're just kind of stuck. I don't necessarily think that attorneys are the issue, because I think most attorneys in general would love to get a quick, clean resolution. Now, there are the attorneys who are just bulldog, litigate everything. We're going to war. But in general, I think that a lot of people in the space want to help, but you end up jaded by the fact that, same thing with the mediators. I mean, how many settlement agreements happen early on in cases? So like these attorneys just become programmed. Okay, we're going to have to go try this in court. We can pull this lever. We can use this maneuver. We can do this thing. And that's going to improve the odds of our client getting what they want. It may not be 100% ethical or right, but it's become acceptable in family court.
Right. Well, and like here, I speak with people like yourself, attorneys, psychologists. Melody here puts a comment that says, love this. As a sociologist, we need to get rid of traditional social norms in family law, which she's as a sociologist who's a professional. is stating to the courts your biasness is destroying. This is old social norms that were deconstructive, and we have the data, we have the psychology, we have the sociology. Everything you said, you've been saying it the whole time, and I say it. Everything points to in cases where, if you can't work out a marriage, and we would suggest that you try to do that, try to save your marriage. People walk away too easy, and a lot of times because they were children of divorce, they have personality disorders, they have trauma. Get help first, and if you absolutely can't, we need a better system than the family court. And I want to go back to that as well. What would be, let's say we dismantled family court, how would you rebuild it?
That's the $1 million question.
Not rebuild family court, not rebuilding family court. What structure would you build that would be in the best interest of humanity?
So, I mean, I think that there would be two different types of cases. You would have to bucket the cases into truly high conflict or truly serious issue, and the cases that the bickering goes back and forth and it's he said, she said, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. Because there's always going to be serious issues. I mean, there are numerous times where individuals walk into my office and it's like they aren't willing to break from their substance abuse issues. They have a long track record of domestic violence. They've done these terrible things, and they still think like, I want full custody.
Right.
And you have to be like, that's really not what's going to be best for the child. That's where the discretion part comes in. So I don't necessarily have this quick fix silver bullet, but it needs to be something where if both parents, let's say the Arkansas law is the best law we have on the books right now. The presumption of 50-50. So it may not be walking into a courtroom. It may be it may require you have professionals that are, whether they're licensed marriage and family counselors, psychologists, therapists, whatever it may be. The first step may be, if you don't agree on what you should do, the first step may be to go into there and become educated by a professional. Mm-hmm. So hey, if you can't agree, we're going to go 50-50. And then you're going to go do so many sessions. And once you get so many sessions in, you're going to go to mediation. Right. I think removing the courtroom early on, because there is something scary about walking into a courtroom and the man or woman sitting up on the bench in a funny looking dress, and the court reporter and the court clerk, and a lot of courtrooms, the old wooden benches. There's something scary about that puts people in an uneasy position. Right. So can we put the parents in a more comfortable position early on? Because a lot of times that first, we'll call it 30 days, there's a lot more, the parties are a lot more agreeable. Right. And the minute then, whether it be in your state, whether it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days before that first court hearing, once that first court hearing happens and everybody's put on that uneasy position, and the judge is going to be making decisions, that's usually when the fireworks really start flowing. Right. So is there a way we can either prolong that period somehow where we keep the parties at ease and we get them to agree before things go way off the rails? I think if we could figure out a system, and then it comes back to, it starts getting extremely complicated. It starts getting too drawn out in terms of the early process. But something where we can put the parties in a room and have someone explain and show them what could be in the best interest of the child. Right. And shows the parties, essentially creates a system where we put, okay, you're getting divorced or you're breaking up, and child custody or divorce is the problem. You as the parents are on the same side battling against this divorce or child custody, rather than pitting the two sides in court against each other right away. Right. Right. Well, I mean, and again, we've dangled these carrots
in front of litigants and parents, and they go, well, if you have the kids, you get the money. So if you're dealing with someone like you're speaking of a lot of the instances where you might not be dealing with somebody that has a personality disorder, or dealing with someone with mental illness, someone who's going to think logically, is those are the scenarios you're talking about, creating that system. But how do we protect against the false alligator, the one with the narcissistic personality, the borderline personality, the one that maybe when you met him or her, you didn't see the red flags, or you ignored them, and now you have kids, and now you're fighting a system that prefers that the two of you duke it out because there's more money in it for attorneys and the courts.
I mean, I think the biggest piece is that, getting those laws where it's clear and convincing evidence to rebut the presumption or to prove something. And there needs to be accountability in terms of, if someone makes an allegation that's unfounded, it's really hard. You're never going to be able to pass a law. A state legislator's never going to be able to vote for a law that punishes someone who accuses another party of domestic violence, and then it's really he said, she said.
Right.
There are laws in most states on the books where if you file false police reports, you say outright false things, that there can be penalties. But it's going to be really, really hard in family court because everything is so he said, she said.
Right. When you prove when someone perjures themselves in family court, there's hardly penalties. Someone gets up there and lies about this, that, you catch them in a lie, and nothing really happens. But you can lose your children over an allegation. But once you get into court, that parent may lie on the stand, right? And no one takes the kids from them.
That's a major issue. Call your local DA. Call your local DA and ask them the last time they prosecuted someone for perjury in family court.
Sure.
It just doesn't happen.
Why are we even swearing?
There are attorneys that are so brazen that they will flat out lie.
Yeah.
And I've had instances, and I don't even want to give I would call the person out by name, but I don't believe in punching down at people like that and giving them any sort of platform. But like presented in court and said, hey, here's the transcript, and here's the email they sent 2 days before that says the complete opposite.
Right.
And the judge did nothing. The judge, it's one of those things where it's just become an accepted part. And that's the biggest challenge in family court, whether it's whether it's evaluators, therapists, the judge. It's been shown that the ultimate question is who to believe.
Right.
That's the ultimate question in family court. And it's been shown none of these parties are effective at deciding fact from fiction.
Right.
That ultimately at its core is a major issue in family court, because it is so he said, she said. It happened in the confines of your home. It happened. It was a phone conversation. Those are the most common things. And we know those people, the judges, the evaluators, the therapists, are not good at determining fact from fiction.
No.
A lot of times they're just looking to pass the buck on to someone else. So if a wrong decision's made, it's not on them.
Yeah. I want to run some. I did this a couple times with some other guests, and I like to run these terms by you that you may have used or have heard. And as an attorney, I like your opinion as well. I want to hear your opinion. Is what's going on in our current system? Would you use the word for these parents that are losing custody without any reason? Is child support extortion?
No, I think child support's a very nuanced discussion. Probably more than an hour-long episode in terms of child support. There are major issues around child support and what it potentially could incentivize. Okay. You see this in a lot of the equal and share, the states where they've pushed bills to their state houses, their state senates. The argument is, it's just dads trying to get out of child support. Right. Well, if you went and looked at the system right now, for every dad that's trying to get out of child support via that, there's at least one mom who is trying to leverage it strictly for the child support.
Absolutely.
that's just a fact. The biggest issues with child support are they don't take into enough account. Like, let's just say it's that standard, like 25 to 30% for one parent, and then the 70 to 75 for the other.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times they don't take into account that, hey, 30% of the time, which is you're looking at 30% of the time is going to be, let's say 10 days a month.
Mm-hmm.
That parent who has the 30% is going to have to provide a bedroom. Well, that bedroom, right. It's not like hey, I'm going to Airbnb that bedroom.
Yeah, I'll rent it out. But when I have my kids, you need to go somewhere else.
Yeah, so they don't take into account things like that. That when you get to the biggest troubles are like the every other weekend type of deals where it's like, yeah, that parent, you're going to take the kid away if that parent doesn't provide the bedroom, if that parent doesn't have X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. But you're not taking account in that in child support. Number two is there's no guardrails to prevent poverty. Right. The number of men that go bankrupt, the number of men who live below poverty, the poverty line because of child support. At the end of the day, child support's kind of a necessary evil because there are going to always be there are always going to be men and women who don't take responsibility for their kids. Right. But what we need to do is have guardrails for the parents that are present and are active in their kids' lives to ensure the kid has a good life with both parents, no matter what that custody split would be. Right. Like here in the state of California, it's gross incomes, custody split, spits out a number. Yeah. That essentially the parent who doesn't have primary custody has to pay. Right. It may not but it doesn't really give the judge much discretion to go in and say, okay, well, they live in LA. There's 2 kids. Both of them are going to have to pay at least $2,500 a month in rent. And you got the food prices and different things like that. And all of a sudden you end up in a situation where dad's scraping by to live in a 1-bedroom apartment. And mom may be scraping by because they've shoved so much parental responsibility onto her plate. Mm-hmm. She may be struggling, scraping by, but she gets that little bit of child support. She can have the 2-bedroom apartment so the kids can share a room. But then they go to court and they say, oh, well, they don't have their own beds with dad or their bed's in his room, this, that. And we don't take that into account. We don't get those. We don't allow the judge to say, hey, we need to make sure that one parent's not just subsidizing the other one and then living below the poverty line. I think that's the biggest thing is the guardrails to prevent poverty from either parent. And then also taking into account those parents that have 25, 35, 45% custody. Mm-hmm. They still have to have all of those necessities and all of those amenities for their child, but child support doesn't necessarily take that into account. Right. If in the current situation, your situation, my situation, I'm every other weekend dad. I've not done anything wrong. I'm fit. 2.5 years into this. Is this, would you say, and this is based on definitions, would you call this parental or child kidnapping? I would probably say just on its face, no. I think that the kidnapping is a very loaded word. I think there is a lot that goes on in family court that could be considered kidnapping. Mm-hmm. But on its face, like I said, I think that it's a tough one because I think it's a gray area. Are there situations where it 100% is that when there are 2 fit parents? Yeah, if there are 2 fit parents and the government I think in malice, in bad faith, or in just straight up discriminatory nature, takes the kid from a parent and that parent doesn't have any time with the kid, I think that could definitely be classified as that. I think there's also a lot that happens in the gray area in terms of deciding who has primary custody. That goes back to he said, she said, and there's probably there is a bias that happens. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't necessarily say it rises to the level of kidnapping. Okay, fair enough. I speak with a lot of parents. I agree as a libertarian. These terms, I agree with them completely. If I look at the system, I see how my kids have been kept from me in order, which I consider kidnapping. Your
you're letting me visit with them, but you've taken my rights away. You've taken their rights away to our relationship, our God-given relationship. So
that's a word those are words we need to get rid of in family courts everywhere. And the state of Colorado actually has the custody and visitation.
Yeah,
they use the terms
parenting,
parental responsibility,
or parenting time.
There is no custody and visitation. It's not that you're visiting your child. This is your time where you have parental responsibility. So I think words like that can go a long way in changing the way things are perceived.
I agree with that. Let's define it a little bit more what it is, because we I see my kids every other weekend, and unfortunately I'd like to raise them a lot more rather than be the Disneyland dad, of course. But the term visitation, it reduces you to almost like you're defective, like you don't get responsibility, or you're not watching or parenting your children. You're visiting with them. I'm not in jail. They're not coming to see me in prison.
Yeah.
But the terminology is important to change. I want you to plug in the last few minutes. I want to bring up your website again real quick and tell people where they can find you at. One of these places is www.realfathers or realfathersrights.com. And that's pretty cool that you incorporated your name in there. Very catchy. So, and also your Facebook page, which I'm going to pull up here for everybody to see. What do you have going on? Tell us about, I know you have your podcast on the Father's Rights Movement, and let us know where we can find you.
Yeah. So if you're in the state of California, realfathersrights.com, represent fathers from San Diego all the way up to Modesto, Stockton, San Jose, and really everywhere in between, primarily based out of Southern California. So Orange County, LA County, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. On social media, Facebook and Instagram at The Father's Rights Attorney. YouTube, we're going to get YouTube up and running a lot more active here in the coming weeks. Every single Thursday night on the Father's Rights Movement's Facebook page and YouTube page, I host a show, State of the Family Courts, and we bring an attorney on from a different state every single week to talk about their laws, what they do. Last week we had Keith Flynn, and he brought Brian Jackson on. They are fathers' rights attorneys out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. We've had Colorado, Texas, Illinois, Oklahoma. So tomorrow night we have an exciting one. We have Arkansas, and we're going to be talking with an attorney who played a huge role in getting their equal and shared parenting bill passed. So that'll be an exciting one.
Awesome.
And then last piece is, I guess we can break some news on here. So we're about halfway done with, I am writing my first book, and about halfway done. And the premise of it, it's not necessarily going to be a book that surprises anyone in the movement. But it's going to tell stories, the 10 core chapters of the book. It's going to tell 10 stories about things that dads have experienced in family court. We got a couple celebrities. We got a couple regular dads. We still are looking for a few people to fill out the book, to do the last couple of chapters in the book. But essentially the premise of it is going to be, we're going to start selling it hopefully in the next 60 days.
Awesome.
It's going to be a lot it's going to depend on the printer. But in the next 60 days, we're going to start selling it. And for every copy we sell, I am going to send a copy to a state or a federal legislator, just to put it in their hands. It's going to be a short, quick book, less than 200 pages, to educate them about what men and women, there's actually going to be one chapter that involves a mom, what men and women go through in the family court system, and make it personal to them. So, so that's an exciting project I'm working on right now. Like I said, we still have a couple chapters that I'm looking to fill with specific things. We're going to talk about child support. We're going to talk about child custody, domestic violence, things that have happened in divorce. We're really going to cover the entire spectrum in the book and just tell people stories. And the purpose of the book is going to be to put it into legislators' hands and kind of give them a window into what really happens in family court.
That's great. That's great. I always like to tell the people, and usually the guests on my show are turning their personal pain into purpose. And you're definitely doing that, Mark. And I appreciate that. And you said, earlier that this thing brings fathers together and men who wouldn't normally meet. You're in California. I would say that I'm closer with people like yourself on an emotional level and a father level and a man level than I am with some of the friends that I've had, and a lot of people who go through this, I've made more friends around this country that I speak to on a daily basis through social media, phone calls, podcasts that I'm very close with. And, I appreciate you being on the show, meeting you, having you on, you doing what you're doing in your profession and fighting back. You're not protecting your industry. You're saying, hey, I'm a family law attorney and what I'm seeing is wrong. And I'm living it myself. And that is extremely brave because the target is not only on my back for being a podcaster and someone who's litigating for his own kids, but for you're putting your career on the line in many ways. And many attorneys in your position have had judges retaliate. Judges don't like, some of them have ego complexes and certain things, and they don't like when attorneys. They don't like when attorneys actually do their job and say, Your Honor, this is the law, because a judge is not supposed to dictate the law. They're supposed to interpret the law as it's written, and a lot of them just use it as a bully pulpit. And that, we have to reignite this country, I think, in many ways, but in our realm, with judges and litigants and parents, guys, they work for us. They are public servants. Most judges are voted in on. So you know what? If you want to make changes, when it's time for re-election, actively go against a judge. You know what I mean? As a citizen. I understand that you're putting yourself at risk, but unfortunately, getting hurt may be the only way that we can fix this problem. It's going to be a no holds barred. You said it's going to be, years in doing things with changing laws. And, I would say fight for your kids every single day. Mark, I hope you get to see your kids. How many kids do you have?
I have two. I had the soon to be
two twins, and they're girls, correct?
One of each.
Do you get to see them currently at all?
Yeah, I currently do get to see them, but it's been a fight to that, and yeah. I think you made a good point. It's a lot of these judges they don't necessarily their role is to call balls and strikes,
right?
But some judges do go beyond that. But yeah, every single day, keep moving forward in a positive way. And if you want to make an impact, the biggest impact, I think people who are watching this, if you're watching this an hour and 8 minutes in, one of the most effective things you can do, I talked about earlier, yelling into the echo chamber. Yeah. Telling your story may be therapeutic to you in these Facebook groups or reaching out to Chris or I, or whoever it may be, but share this show on your personal feed. Yeah. Let your family and friends see it. Maybe a few of them will watch, even if it's just a few minutes. Share the content that myself or Chris or any of the other organizations put out, because we need to educate people outside of the movement. Everyone in here knows what happens, what goes down, how it works, how it operates. But you had no idea before you got into the system. Right. Just thought it'd be fair. It'd be easy. Okay, we're both good people. We have to educate those people who aren't in the system, because the numbers show when we ask questions, like everybody's for equal and shared parenting, 80 to 90% of voters. But what they aren't educated on what's actually going on in the system right now. Right. Trust me. Yeah. Oh, I know. I spoke with my representative and he was like, that didn't happen. Do you really? And I was like, yeah, man, I'll bring you the court audio. You can listen to it yourself. Yeah. So that's how we do it. Educate. I'll bring it into the General Assembly. Mark, thank you so much for coming on. I'm definitely going to have you back because I could talk to you for another hour or two. I want to know more about your story. I want to know more about what you're doing. But for tonight, we're going to say goodnight, and we'll see you next time. All right, Chris, thank you for having me on. We'll see you.